The desert wind carried a dry whistle as it swept across the red cliffs, filling the silence between two strangers who had been thrust into a fate neither had chosen. The land was raw and unforgiving, painted with the dust of centuries, yet it bore witness to something far older than the canyon walls themselves: tradition, honor, and the unbending laws of a people who lived and breathed by them. Beneath the weight of the blazing sun, she stood with her heart racing, her breath uneven, and her eyes locked on the man before her. His gaze was steady, piercing, and filled with something both fierce and unyielding, as though the earth itself had chosen him to speak these words. "You must marry me, tribal law commands it," he said, his voice like thunder rolling over the desert plains. The words struck her harder than the heat, harder than the dust clinging to her skin. Marriage? To him? She searched his face, finding neither cruelty nor mockery there, but a kind of longing so deep it unsettled her more than anger ever could. His eyes told a story, one of duty, of loyalty to his people, and of a heart that burned for something he had not dared to claim until this moment. The silence between them deepened. All around, the desert stretched wide, endless, unbroken except for the cry of a hawk overhead. She wanted to turn away, to protest, to tell him this was madness. Yet something in his presence kept her rooted. She saw in him a warrior shaped by struggle, a man bound to laws older than her understanding, yet also a man who looked at her not just as a command of his tribe, but as if she herself were the command carved into his very soul. Her mind churned with memories of how she had come to this place. The wagon trail, the journey westward, the promises of a new life carved from the wilderness, it all seemed so far away now. She had imagined orchards and rivers, towns where laughter spilled into saloons and children played in the dust. But the West was not made of dreams. It was made of survival. And survival often took from you what you never thought you would lose. When the riders came, his people, painted in the colors of the desert, their faces proud and solemn, she had believed it was the end. Instead, it was the beginning of something else, something she could neither understand nor escape. The elders had spoken, voices like stone grinding against stone, laying down the law that bound her to him. It was not a request, not a plea. It was a decree. Now, standing before him, she felt the truth of that decree settle heavy in her chest. Yet, she also felt the strange pull of his nearness. His strength was not just in his arms or his stance, but in the way he looked at her, as if she were not a prisoner, but a promise. "I do not wish for this," she whispered, her voice trembling though she tried to steady it. He stepped closer, the shadow of his frame falling across her, the scent of smoke and earth clinging to him. His voice softened, though the command in his words remained. "Nor did I, once. But it is written, and in the eyes of my people, to turn from it would bring dishonor. You are not a stranger now. You are bound to us, bound to me." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to hate him for the certainty in his tone, for the way he spoke as though her fate had already been sealed. Yet she could not. There was no cruelty in his words, only a raw sincerity that left her torn between fear and something else she dared not name. The desert around them seemed to close in, as if listening, waiting for her answer. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow slipping across the canyon wall. A silent reminder that in this vast wilderness, the choices of men and women were as small as grains of sand. She turned her face away, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. Could she defy the weight of tradition? Could she walk away, knowing the cost it might bring not just to herself, but to him, and perhaps to both of their people? When she looked back at him, his expression had softened, though the fire in his gaze had not dimmed. "I will not force you," he said quietly, "but know this once spoken, the law cannot be undone. If you walk away, you walk into the wrath of the desert and the judgment of the tribe. And if you stay as mine. The words hung between them, heavy as stone, fragile as glass. Her breath caught, the ground beneath her feet feeling suddenly unsteady dot in the distance. Drums began to echo, faint at first, then growing stronger, rolling across the canyons like the heartbeat of the earth itself. She knew what they meant. The tribe was gathering. The ceremony was near. Her throat tightened. Time was slipping from her grasp, carrying her toward a choice she had never asked for, yet could no longer avoid. She looked at him once more, and for a moment she saw not just the warrior, not just the enforcer of law, but the man. And in his eyes there was no victory, no pride, only longing, fierce and unrelenting, like the desert sun that scorched the sky above. Her lips parted, but no words came. The drums grew louder. The shadows lengthened. The moment was closing in on her. Would she yield to a law older than herself, or defy it and face whatever storm came after? The answer trembled on her tongue as the desert held its breath. The drums carried across the desert air like a steady heartbeat, each strike echoing against the canyon walls until it seemed the very land itself was alive with sound. She stood frozen, her fingers curling into the folds of her dress, her mind pulled between disbelief and fear. The man before her remained steady, his stance rooted in strength. Yet in his eyes flickered something she had not expected, a shadow of hesitation, a hint of vulnerability beneath the weight of duty. It unsettled her even more than the command of marriage. She tried to breathe deeply, but the air felt thin, carrying the scent of dry earth, smoke, and sage. Her gaze darted over his broad frame, the raw edges of leather and beads bound across his arms, the long hair tied back against the wind. He looked like he had been carved from the desert itself, as immovable as the cliffs around them. Yet his eyes held something more than stone. They held a question, a silent waiting. She could not answer it, not yet. Behind her, the path she had taken seemed impossibly far away. The wagon trails, the memory of family voices, the warmth of campfires, they belonged to another life, one that had slipped from her grasp the moment she had fallen into the hands of his people. She remembered the raid, though it had not been a raid in the way she had once imagined from whispered stories. There had been no blood, no cruelty. Only speed, strength, and the sudden shift of everything she thought was safe. She had been taken, yes, but not harmed. And when the elders spoke their judgment, declaring the law, it had been delivered not with malice, but with solemnity. Still, she could not understand why the law demanded her. Why her among the others? She had not been told, only placed beneath the gaze of the tribe, her fate decided by voices that did not belong to her. The drums grew louder now, steady and commanding, and she realized they were not far away. The tribe was gathering in the hollow where the cliffs met, a place that echoed with tradition. She could see small fires lighting in the distance, thin trails of smoke curling into the pale sky. Her chest tightened. This was no simple ritual. This was a binding, one that could not be undone once spoken. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching over her in the dimming light. "You must understand," he said quietly, his tone softer than before. "This is not only about us. The law protects my people. It binds us together so that no one is left without honor or place. If I turn from it, I bring shame upon my family, upon the council. If you turn from it, you are cast into the wilderness alone." The desert does not forgive. His words chilled her more than the evening wind. She tried to find her voice. "But I do not belong here. I am not of your people." He held her gaze, his jaw tight, his expression unwavering. "You are now. The moment the elders spoke, you became part of us. Whether you wish it or not, the law claims you." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wanted to argue, to fight against it, but the strength in his words was like the desert cliffs, unyielding, eternal. Yet beneath that strength, she felt the weight he carried, the burden of being the one chosen to speak this command. It was not only her fate bound by this law, it was his as well. The sound of horses drifted toward them, the soft clatter of hooves over rock. Others were coming. She could see shadows moving along the ridge, figures draped in buckskin and feathers, their faces unreadable in the fading light. They moved with the silence of those who had walked the land all their lives, their presence commanding without words. She realized then how small her protests were in the face of this vast, ancient rhythm. Her heart hammered, yet a part of her could not look away from him. She studied the lines of his face, the scars etched faintly across his skin, the steady rise and fall of his chest as he stood waiting for her answer. There was fierceness in him, yes, but not cruelty. He was not the enemy she had been taught to fear. He was something else entirely, a man torn between duty and longing, a man who looked at her as if she were both his burden and his desire. She turned her face toward the canyon, where the fires burned brighter, trying to make sense of the pull in her chest. If she walked into that circle, she knew her life would never again be her own. Yet if she ran, she would not survive a day in the desert, nor the judgment that would follow. The thought twisted inside her like a knife. The riders reached them, halting their horses a short distance away. They did not speak, only watched. She felt their eyes on her, their patience wearing thin. The ceremony was waiting. The man at her side shifted, his voice low so that only she could hear. Do not fear them. They will not harm you. Their eyes are hard because they guard the law. But if you stay, if you take this step, you will not be alone. You will have me. The words sank deep into her, stirring something she could not name. She wanted to resist, to push him away, to cling to the life she once knew. Yet she could not ignore the part of her that heard the truth in his promise. He spoke not as a captor, but as a man offering what little choice remained. The drums thundered again, faster now, echoing off the cliffs like storm clouds gathering in the distance. The riders dismounted, their steps slow, deliberate, as they moved to guide her toward the firelit circle. She resisted at first, her body stiff, her breath shallow. Yet as they drew closer, she felt his hand brush lightly against hers, not forcing, not commanding, only steadying her. She almost pulled away, but stopped. The circle came into view, filled with faces lit by firelight, eyes sharp as arrows and voices humming low in unison. The elders sat at the center, their presence heavy, their silence more powerful than speech. All turned to watch as she entered, her steps faltering beneath the weight of their gaze. The man walked at her side, his expression unreadable, yet she could feel the tension in him, the struggle between law and heart. She wondered if he had wanted this, or if the command had bound him just as tightly as it had bound her. As they reached the center, the drums ceased. The silence that followed was louder than any sound, pressing against her chest until she could barely breathe. The eldest among them rose, his voice carrying like the wind across stone. He spoke of the law, of the bond between two lives, of duty and survival. His words were sharp, ancient, woven into the very fabric of the desert. She felt them pressing down on her, binding her to a fate she had not chosen. And yet, as the elder's voice faded, it was not his words she heard echoing in her mind. It was the warrior's. You will not be alone. You will have me. Her eyes flicked to his, searching for something, an escape, a truth, a crack in the armor of duty. What she found instead was a longing so fierce it made her breath catch. He did not look at her as a stranger. He looked at her as if she were already his, as if the law had merely spoken aloud what he had carried in his heart all along. The fire crackled. The circle waited, and the elder's voice rose again, calling for her answer. Her throat tightened. The world around her seemed to blur, the faces melting into shadow, the firelight bending and twisting. All she could see was him, his eyes, his stance. his steady presence in the midst of it all. But the choice, if choice it was, still hung in the balance. The law demanded her voice. The tribe demanded her vow. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the words that would seal her fate. She opened her mouth, but before any sound could come, the drums struck once more, shattering the silence, calling the night into a deeper mystery. The drums did not fade this time. They pounded steady, relentless, like a storm rolling closer across the desert sky. The fire crackled, casting long shadows that danced along the faces gathered in the circle. Every eye was fixed on her, waiting for the words that would bind her to a life she did not choose. She could feel the pressure in her chest, heavy as stone, each heartbeat keeping time with the thunder of the drums. The elder's voice rose again, ancient and unbending, reminding her of the weight of tradition. He spoke of loyalty, of survival, of honor. His words carried not only the law but the power of generations who had lived and died by it. She wanted to shout, to cry that she was not one of them, that her life was her own. But her voice caught in her throat, trapped beneath the weight of so many stares. Beside her, the warrior remained still. His shoulders were set, his gaze fixed on her as if nothing else in the world existed. His presence steadied her, even as it unsettled her. He was not forcing her hand, yet she knew his heart was bound by the same decree that bound hers. It was not only her freedom at stake, but his honor, his place among his people. She felt torn between defiance and pity, between fear and the strange pull she could not name. The circle grew restless. A low murmur rippled among the gathered, and she could sense their impatience. The fire hissed as sparks leapt into the air, vanishing against the night sky. She drew a sharp breath, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the tension. It was a woman's voice, firm and edged with bitterness. One of the tribeswomen stepped forward, her eyes blazing as they locked on her. "Why her?" the woman demanded, her tone carrying across the firelit hollow. "Why is she chosen when our own daughters wait? Why should an outsider be given to one of our own, when so many among us have no place, no husband, no bond?" The crowd shifted, voices rising in agreement. The elder raised his hand for silence, but the question hung heavy in the air, refusing to fade. Her breath caught, and she felt the sting of the woman's words cut deeper than the desert wind. She had not asked for this, had not sought to steal a place that did not belong to her. Yet here she stood, the unwilling cause of envy and resentment. The warrior's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking to the woman who spoke. He answered with measured words, though she could hear the strain in his voice. The law was clear. The elders chose. This is not mine to question, nor yours. But the tribeswoman did not back down. It should be ours to question when one of our own is denied. You speak of law, but what of blood? What of loyalty to those who share it? Her eyes narrowed, glancing toward the outsider with sharp disdain. She does not belong. She never will. The elder's staff struck the ground, silencing the murmurs once again. His voice was sharp, cutting through the fire's crackle. The law does not bend to envy. It does not bow to desire. What has been spoken must stand. Still, the resentment lingered in the circle. She could feel it pressing against her skin like the heat of the fire, whispers threading through the crowd like smoke. She was not only bound by law but marked by suspicion, an outsider thrust into the heart of a people who would not welcome her. Easily. Her heart pounded as she realized the conflict stretched far beyond herself. If she stayed, she would not only face the burden of being bound to him, but the weight of mistrust from those who believed. Her presence was a wound against their own. And if she left, the desert would claim her before long. The path ahead was tangled no matter which way she turned. That night, as the tribe dispersed from the circle, she found herself pulled deeper into the camp. Fires glowed across the canyon hollow, shadows of men and women moving quietly among them. She was led to a small shelter of hides and brush, simple but warm against the desert air. He followed, his presence steady at her back, though she could sense the unspoken words between them. Inside, the silence pressed heavy. He stood near the entrance, his eyes watching her with quiet intensity. She turned from him, clutching her arms around herself, her mind still swirling with the memory of the tribeswoman's anger. Finally, she found her voice. "They hate me. They do not want me here." His tone was low, almost gentle. "Not all. Some see only the law. Some see more." She turned back, searching his face. "And what do you see?" He hesitated, his eyes meeting hers with a fierceness that made her breath catch. "I see what has been given to me. I see what I did not ask for, yet cannot turn from. I see someone who does not understand the law, but who will one day know why it is as it is." His words carried a quiet conviction, though she could not tell if it came from duty or something deeper. She wanted to press him, to demand answers, but exhaustion weighed heavy. She lay down on the furs laid across the ground, though sleep did not come easily. Outside, the drums had faded, but the voices of the tribe lingered in the night, their whispers carrying both curiosity and mistrust. In the days that followed, she moved like a shadow among them. Some watched her with suspicion, others with indifference, a few with quiet kindness. The children were the boldest, their eyes wide with wonder, their laughter breaking the heavy silence that surrounded her. She found small comfort in their presence, though even then, she felt the invisible line that marked her as different. He remained close, though he never pressed her with demands. He showed her the ways of the desert, the paths to water hidden among the rocks, the herbs that healed, the signs of storms etched in the clouds. He spoke little, yet his actions spoke enough. Still, she sensed the strain in him, the pull between his people's doubts and his own growing bond with her. But beneath it all, the tension remained. The tribeswoman who had spoken out continued to stir whispers, her resentment burning like dry brush ready to catch flame. The elders held their ground, yet even their authority seemed tested by the unease in the camp. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, she overheard hushed voices near the fires. Words of defiance, of challenge, of breaking the law if it meant protecting their own. Her heart raced as she realized the danger was not only the desert beyond the camp, but the storm building within it. When she returned to the shelter, he was waiting. His eyes narrowed as he saw her expression, the fear she could not hide. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against her arm, steadying her once again. "What did you hear?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will not accept me. They speak of defying the elders. They speak of stopping this before it is too late." His jaw tightened, his gaze hardening with a resolve that sent a chill through her. "Then it begins sooner than I thought." Her breath caught. "What begins?" He looked at her with a fire in his eyes that both frightened and steadied her. "The test. Not of you alone, but of me, of us. The law binds, but the people's hearts must follow. If they do not, then the bond breaks not by words, but by blood." The weight of his words sank deep, heavier than the desert night. She realized then that the struggle was not only about her fate, not only about their bond, but about the survival of his honor, his place, perhaps even his people. The fire crackled between them, the shadows stretching long across the shelter walls. She could feel the storm gathering around them, unseen yet inevitable, waiting for the moment it would break. And as she lay awake through the long night, she knew the choice that had once seemed hers alone was now tangled in something far greater, something that could not be undone by words or wishes. The desert was waiting. The tribe was watching. And the drums, though silent now, would soon thunder again. The days passed, each one tightening the cord that bound her to the tribe, to him, and to the law that hovered over them like a storm cloud refusing to break. The desert sun burned relentless. the nights cold enough to bite into her bones. Yet it was not the elements that weighed heaviest on her heart. It was the simmering unrest she felt growing in the shadows of the camp, the whispered voices that hushed when she approached, the stares that carried more than mere curiosity. The resentment was spreading, and she could feel it like a fire smoldering beneath dry brush, waiting for the wind to spark it into flame. The warrior never spoke of it directly, but she could see it in him too. The way his shoulders stiffened when he passed certain men, the way his eyes lingered on the tribeswoman who had first spoken against her, who still watched her with cold contempt. The law might have spoken, but the hearts of the people had not followed, and that truth clung to every moment between them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the canyon walls turned red as blood, the elders called for another gathering. The air was thick with unease, the tribe filing into the circle of fire with a tension that was impossible to ignore. She sat at the edge, her hands trembling in her lap, while he stood tall beside her, his expression carved from stone. The eldest rose, his voice carrying the authority of generations. He spoke of tradition, of obedience, of the bond that had been decreed. His words were sharp, deliberate, echoing against the canyon walls. Yet even as he spoke, murmurs stirred in the crowd. Voices rose in protest, in doubt, in quiet defiance. The circle no longer felt like a place of unity but of division, split between those who clung to law and those who questioned it. Then the tribeswoman stepped forward again. Her voice was clear, her tone laced with fury. "You speak of law, but law is not greater than the blood of our people. Why should one not of us take what belongs to our own? Why should he be bound to her when so many daughters of this tribe wait with empty hands?" The fire popped loudly, throwing sparks into the night as silence fell. All eyes turned to the warrior, waiting for his answer. He stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the circle, steady and unflinching. "I did not ask for this bond, yet I will not turn from it. The law is not mine to bend. It is not hers to refuse. It was spoken, and what is spoken must stand." The tribeswoman's eyes blazed. "Then you betray your people. You betray the women who belong here. If the elders choose against us, then we will choose for ourselves." The murmur grew louder, voices rising like a tide. For the first time, the elders' staff striking the ground did not silence them. The law was being questioned openly, the balance of order tipping dangerously toward chaos. Her breath came fast, her chest tight as she realized the storm that had been building was breaking before her eyes. She glanced at him, searching for something in his expression, but his face was unreadable, his body tense as a bowstring drawn to its limit. The circle ended in disorder, the people dispersing in clusters, their voices sharp in the night. No resolution had been reached, only deeper cracks carved into the heart of the tribe. She walked back to the shelter with him, her steps unsteady, her heart pounding. Inside, the silence pressed down like a weight. Finally, she turned to him, her voice trembling. "They will not let this stand. They will fight it, and when they do, it will fall on both of us." He met her gaze, his jaw tight, his eyes fierce. "Then let them. The law is not mine to defend, it defends itself. But if they come for you, they will find me first." His words should have brought comfort, but instead they deepened her fear. This was no longer only about her survival in the desert. It was about his survival among his people, about whether he could hold his place when so many questioned his bond. In the days that followed, the unrest only grew. She heard whispers of challenge, of rebellion against the elders' decree. The tribeswoman's voice carried strongest, gathering others to her cause. She could feel the division like a wound that refused to close. The children no longer came near as freely, and the kindness of a few grew colder under the weight of pure judgment. One night, unable to sleep, she slipped quietly from the shelter. The moon hung low, silver light stretching across the canyon floor. She walked to the ridge, the cool night air stinging her skin. From there, she could see the campfires below, scattered across the hollow like stars fallen to earth. She wrapped her arms around herself, the silence heavy. Her thoughts spinning dots. She did not hear him approach until he stood beside her. His presence was steady, grounding, yet she could feel the tension in him too. He said nothing at first, only stood with her beneath the moonlight, their silence speaking louder than words. Finally, he turned, his eyes catching the silver glow. "You think of leaving," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "If I leave, the desert will take me. If I stay, your people will." He studied her, his face unreadable. "Then what do you choose?" She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "There is no choice." He turned away, his hands tightening at his sides. "There is always a choice. But some choices carry a price neither heart nor body can bear." The words sank deep, and she wondered if he spoke only of her or of himself as well. She wanted to ask, to push past the walls he carried, but before she could, a sound broke the silence. A shout from below, sharp and urgent, followed by the sudden clash of voices. They hurried back, their steps quick against the rocky ground. As they neared the camp, she saw the firelit circle once again filled with figures, but this time there was no order, no calm. The tribeswoman stood at the center, her voice carrying above the rest, calling for defiance, for the breaking of the decree. The elders stood firm, their faces grim, their voices steady, but the crowd pressed closer, their unrest turning into anger. The air was thick with it, charged and dangerous. She felt her heart hammering as she realized this was no longer about words. It was about to become something far worse. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos, commanding attention. "Enough, the law has spoken. To defy it is to defy all that holds us together. Do you wish to tear apart what has kept us alive through the desert and the storms? Do you wish to burn what cannot be rebuilt?" But the tribeswoman's answer came sharp and unyielding. "We wish for what is ours. If the law binds us to betrayal, then the law is broken." The circle erupted, voices shouting, bodies pressing forward. She stood frozen at the edge, her breath coming fast, fear gripping her throat. The elder's staff struck the ground again and again, but it could not quiet the rising storm. He turned to her then, his eyes locking on hers with a fire that made her chest tighten. "Stay close. Whatever happens, do not leave my side." She nodded, her voice caught in her throat, unable to form words. The circle churned, the tribe divided, the law hanging by a thread. The fire roared higher, sparks flying into the night as if the desert itself was watching, waiting. She felt the moment shift, the tension snapping into something sharper, more dangerous. The tribeswoman stepped closer, her eyes blazing, her voice fierce. "Then let the bond be tested. Let it be proven in the way of our people. By challenge." The word hung in the air like a blade, and the circle fell into sudden silence. All eyes turned to him, waiting for his answer. Her breath caught as she realized what it meant. The challenge was not just against the law, but against him, against his right to stand by her. It would not be decided by words, but by strength, by blood, by the clash of will and steel beneath the desert sky. He stood tall, his jaw set, his gaze steady. He did not look at her, not yet, but she could feel the weight of his choice pressing against her heart. The circle waited, the night held its breath, and she knew the next words he spoke would carry them both into the heart of the storm. The fire roared higher, the desert wind howled through the cliffs, and the drums began to beat again, harder, faster, as if calling forth the climax of a story that could no longer be stopped. The fire roared high, throwing sparks into the black desert sky, and the drums thundered like a heartbeat too fast to control. The word of challenge hung sharp in the air, and no one moved, no one breathed. The elder stood silent, his staff gripped tightly, but even his authority could not still the restless crowd. all eyes fixed on the warrior, waiting for his answer, waiting for him to either step into the storm or walk away from it. He turned slowly, his face unreadable, though his eyes burned with a steady flame. He looked not at the woman who had spoken the challenge, but at her. His gaze held her fast, and in it she saw more than duty. She saw the weight of the choice he carried, a choice that would decide both their fates. Then his voice broke the silence, strong and clear, ringing through the circle. "I accept." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others cried out in fear or protest, but it no longer mattered. The path had been chosen, and the law would now be tested in the oldest way their people knew. The challenge was set. The tribeswoman who had called for it stepped back, and from the shadows another figure emerged, a warrior of the tribe, broad and fierce, his eyes cold with purpose. He was no stranger. She recognized him as one who had often spoken against her, whose glares had followed her since the decree was first spoken. His presence was heavy, his stance one of certainty, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. The circle widened, the fire at its center blazing brighter. She stood at the edge, her heart racing, her breath caught in her chest. The elder raised his hand, speaking words of ritual, binding the challenge to honor, to truth, to the eyes of all who watched. There would be no going back. The two men stepped into the circle, facing one another, the firelight painting their faces with shadows. The drums fell silent now, replaced by the crackle of flame and the hush of the gathered tribe. Time itself seemed to still, the desert holding its breath as the first move was made. The clash was sudden, fierce, the sound of flesh striking flesh echoing across the hollow. Dust rose beneath their feet, their bodies locked in a struggle that was more than strength. It was survival. It was honor. It was the weight of tradition pressing into every blow. She could not look away, though every strike tore at her heart. The challenger was strong, relentless, but the warrior who had spoken for her moved with a fire she had never seen before. His body carried the scars of battles past, but his will burned brighter than the desert sun. Still, it was no easy fight. Each man was driven by something deeper than pride, one by the fury of being denied, the other by the fierce determination to protect what the law had given him. She watched, her hands trembling, her lips whispering prayers she had never spoken before. The circle around her shifted with every movement of the fight, voices rising in gasps, in shouts, in cries of warning or encouragement. The struggle dragged on, each blow heavier, each moment pulling tighter against the fragile line between victory and defeat. At last, the challenger faltered, his body slowing under the weight of exhaustion. The warrior seized the moment, striking with all the strength that remained. The challenger fell, the dust swallowing him, the fire casting his defeat in sharp relief. The circle erupted again, voices shouting, some in triumph, some in protest, but all united in the undeniable truth. The fight was over. The bond stood. The elder's staff struck the ground, and his voice carried over the chaos. The law has been tested. The bond remains. Let there be no more words against it. The crowd slowly quieted, though not all hearts were satisfied. Some faces burned with resentment, others with relief. But none could deny what they had seen. The law had spoken not only through words but through the clash of strength, and the warrior had prevailed. She felt her knees weaken with relief, her chest aching with the weight of it all. He stood in the center, his chest heaving, his face streaked with dust and sweat. His eyes found hers, and for a moment, the fire, the crowd, the law, all of it faded. There was only him, steady, unbroken, and the unspoken promise that she would not face this alone. In the days that followed, the camp slowly settled. The whispers did not vanish entirely, but they grew quieter, swallowed by the truth of what had been witnessed. The tribeswoman who had led the defiance turned inward, her fire dimmed. though her eyes still burned with quiet anger. Yet even she could not raise her voice against the law again. For her, life remained strange, caught between worlds. She was not of their blood, but neither was she a stranger now. The children returned first, their laughter chasing away the shadows of unrest. Then others, slowly, cautiously, offering food, words, even faint smiles. The resentment had not vanished, but the fight had left its mark, a mark that carried weight among a people who valued strength and endurance above all. He remained at her side, guiding her through each step, teaching her the ways of the desert, the traditions of his people. He spoke more freely now, though always with a quiet steadiness. She began to see the man beyond the warrior, the heart behind the duty. And though the bond had been forced by law, something deeper began to grow between them, something neither had expected but neither could deny. There were nights when she still lay awake, staring at the endless sky, wondering about the life she had left behind. The family, the wagon trail, the dreams of orchards and rivers. Those memories tugged at her, but they felt more distant with each passing day, like echoes fading into silence. Here, in the heart of the desert, among people who had once seen her as nothing but an intruder, she was carving something new, something she had never imagined. The conflict had not been without cost, but from it came a strange peace. She realized that survival was not only about the body enduring, but the heart finding its place, even in the harshest of lands. She had found a place, though it had not come in the way she wished. One evening, as the sun sank low and the canyon walls glowed red, she stood at the ridge once more, looking out over the desert. He came to stand beside her, silent at first, as he often was. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of all they had endured. "You were right when you said you did not belong. At first, neither of us believed you could. But now, when I look at you, I do not see an outsider. I see someone who has endured what few could. I see someone who has walked through fire and not broken. That is what it means to belong." Her eyes stung with tears, not of fear this time, but of something softer, something she had not let herself feel. She turned to him, her voice quiet but steady. "And what do you see when you look at us?" He held her gaze, his expression unguarded at last. "I see what the law began, but what the heart has chosen. I see not just a bond of command, but of truth." The desert wind swept past them, carrying with it the scent of sage, the distant cry of a hawk, the endless song of a land both brutal and beautiful. She felt his hand brush against hers, not as a command this time, not as a decree, but as a choice freely made. The journey that had begun with fear and defiance had brought her to a place she could never have imagined. The law had bound them, yes, but it was survival, endurance, and the fire of the heart that kept them standing. And as the last light of day faded into night, she knew the desert would always test them, always demand strength, always call them to endure. But she no longer feared it, for in the eyes of the warrior who had once spoken the command that had changed her life, she now saw not only fierce longing, but the quiet certainty of belonging. The story that had begun with law and fire ended with something far greater: two lives, bound not only by tradition but by the choice to face the desert together. And in that she found peace. Top of form, bottom of form.